Last Saturday morning, just as I was sipping my first cup of coffee and watching my two German shepherds, Rex and Juno, sunbathe by the porch, a white SUV rolled up to my driveway like it owned the place. Out stepped Brenda Ellison, HOA vice president and full-time neighborhood tyrant, wearing her usual pastel blazer and that tight-lipped expression like she just bit into a lemon. Behind her were two guys in navy polos that said HOA Compliance Division in faded letters. I'd never seen them before. They had clipboards, earpieces, and walkie-talkies like they were about to raid a cartel hideout. "In Bradford," Brenda barked, marching right up to my gate. "We're conducting a surprise exterior inspection. You need to let us in. Immediately." I stood at the top of my porch steps, mug in hand. "Funny, Brenda. I don't remember giving you permission to bring the Avengers to my property." "This is official HOA business," she snapped. "We received multiple complaints about unauthorized fencing modifications and potential vermin harboring in your shed." "My shed?" I raised an eyebrow. "The one you can't even see from the street?" She ignored that. One of the polo guys stepped forward. "Sir, we need to enter your backyard. HOA regulations allow for spontaneous inspections under Article 16, Section..." "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. "First of all, that's not real. I wrote the bylaws for this neighborhood 5 years ago, back before Brenda and her little election stunt." Brenda's face twitched. "Second," I continued, "you two aren't on any official HOA payroll. I checked last week after your little newsletter claimed there was a compliance enforcement team. There's no such thing." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Ian, you're obstructing an investigation." "No," I said, whistling once. "I'm letting my dogs greet your fake inspectors." Rex and Juno bolted down the steps, barking like sirens. The two men immediately backed up, tripping over each other. One dropped his clipboard and nearly fell into Brenda. "Call them off," she shrieked. "Only if you leave my property and stop pretending you've got federal authority." I pulled out my phone. "Actually, stay right there. Let's see what the real police think about some strangers impersonating officials and trespassing." Brenda's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. I already had the phone to my ear. "Hi, yes? I've got some individuals impersonating HOA officials trying to force entry onto private property." "Yes, I have video footage." The two fake inspectors were already speed walking back to their SUV when Brenda turned and shouted, "This isn't over, Ian." "Oh, I know," I said, watching her stumble into the passenger seat. "Because now it's a criminal matter." Detective Marla Tierney showed up the next day, not in uniform, but with a badge clipped to her belt and a dark green notepad tucked under her arm. She parked her unmarked sedan right outside my mailbox and stepped out like she already knew the ending to the story and was just here for the paperwork. "You Ian Bradford?" she asked, flipping open her pad. "Yeah," I said, walking out from the garage where I'd been organizing tools. "You must be here about yesterday." She nodded. "Got the footage you submitted. Already ran the plates off the SUV. Brenda's name didn't come up, but the vehicle's registered to a landscaping company out of Claymont." "Guess what? I waited. They've never heard of her." Said the SUV was rented out by someone named Ellison Consulting, a shell company with a P.O. box and no employees. I wiped my hands on a rag. "So she's operating off the books. She's either real sloppy or real confident no one's gonna push back." "You the one who wrote the HOA bylaws?" "Back when the board still followed them, yeah." Marla scribbled something. "You ever authorize any compliance team?" "Nope. In fact, the current bylaws require a vote of the membership for any enforcement division. 60% minimum. Never happened." She nodded again, slower this time. "Mind if I take a walk around your place? Just confirming there's no actual violation to give her wiggle room." "Go ahead. The shed's locked, by the way. You'll need this." I tossed her the key. As she walked the perimeter, I could hear her muttering measurements, snapping pictures with her phone. 15 minutes later, she came back around, her expression unreadable. "You've got better upkeep than most city parks," she said. "Not that it's my job to care, but from a legal standpoint, there's no basis for them showing up here." Which means we're now looking at criminal trespass and impersonating officials. I leaned against the porch railing. "Think she'll get charged?" "That depends on what else we find." I've already requested security footage from the gas station down the road. If she used that SUV to approach other houses, we might be looking at a pattern. Want my ring footage too? She was here last month with a clipboard asking my neighbor about roof tiles. He's got early onset dementia. She probably thought he wouldn't remember. Marla gave me a sharp look. Now that's something I can use. Forward it to my department. And if you hear anything at all, call me directly. She handed me a card with a handwritten number on the back, then paused before stepping off the porch. She's not just power tripping, she said. She's running something. Might be small time now, but people like that don't stop unless they hit a wall. You just became that wall. After she left, I spent the next few hours going through my external camera backups. Not just mine, my neighbor Terry across the street owed me a favor after I helped him pressure wash his siding last summer, so I called in the favor. His front camera had a wide view of the whole street, including where Brenda had parked, and gestured to the two fake inspectors before they approached my driveway. That night I compiled everything: timestamps, angles, even a clip showing one of the men pointing at my backyard as if mapping something out. I emailed it all to Detective Tierney's office, added a note about a suspicious email Brenda sent to the HOA last week about enforcing new community standards, and attached a screenshot. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:45. Bradford, it's Tierney. We've got confirmation. Those two guys? One's on probation for fraud. The other has an outstanding warrant in Delaware for unlawful entry. You just helped us crack a side scam. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. What were they doing with Brenda? That's what we're figuring out. We're pulling financials on Ellison Consulting now. Also, your HOA's bank account just got flagged. There's a withdrawal for $6,000 made 2 days ago, same day she rented that SUV. Guess where it went? Ellison Consulting? Bingo! By the afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had gotten out, probably through Terry, who has the subtlety of a marching band. A few residents started gathering around my driveway, asking what was going on. Normally I'd wave them off, but now I wanted eyes. Here's the short version, I told them. Brenda misused HOA funds to hire 2 unlicensed inspectors to come onto private property. They had no authority and were impersonating officials. Police are involved. My next-door neighbor, Tanisha, folded her arms. She tried to fine me last week for excessive lawn decorations. Said my daughter's birthday balloons violated the visual harmony clause. She made that clause up, I said. Check the bylaws. Nothing in there about balloons or harmony. Another neighbor, Cliff, spoke up. She told me I had to remove my flagpole. Said it was a safety hazard. Marla's words echoed in my head. She's running something. That evening, I organized an emergency homeowners meeting at the community clubhouse. According to the bylaws, we could legally hold one with only 20% of resident signatures. By 5 o'clock, I had 42. The clubhouse was packed by 6. People stood shoulder to shoulder, murmuring, trading stories. I brought a projector and loaded up a slideshow of security footage, financial documents, and Brenda's phony email. Let's make one thing clear, I began. This isn't about lawn chairs or paint colors. This is a pattern of abuse. Brenda Ellison used association funds to hire 2 men with criminal records. She sent them to inspect homes without vote, without cause, and without notice. That's not leadership. That's exploitation. Gasps echoed through the room as I played the clip of the SUV arriving, the 2 men approaching my driveway, and Brenda pointing them toward the backyard. Then I showed the bank withdrawal. Then the shell company registration. She used our dues to fund a fake enforcement team. She used our trust to manipulate us into compliance. And now she's under investigation. Someone yelled from the back, "Let's vote her out." I raised my hand. We can't just remove her tonight, but we can suspend her pending legal review and call a special election. It's all in the bylaws. Tanisha stood. Then let's do it. Right now. The vote wasn't close. 67-2. The two were Brenda's cousins who looked like they wanted to crawl under their folding chairs. We appointed an interim president, Ruth Delgado, a retired attorney who once took on a zoning board and won. Brenda was officially suspended. She didn't show up to the meeting. Probably knew better. 3 days later, Marla called again. We're charging her with misappropriation of community funds and conspiracy to commit fraud. You'll probably be contacted as a witness. I told her to let me know when. I'd testify for free. Hell, I'd bring snacks. By the end of the week, a locksmith changed the HOA office locks. Ruth ordered a full audit. We found more vendor kickbacks, inflated invoices, and even a consulting fee she paid herself last April. Brenda was arrested without fanfare. No one protested. No one even looked surprised. As for the two fake inspectors, one turned state's witness within 24 hours. The other went quiet, probably lawyering up. The neighborhood changed after that. People started talking again. Terry hosted a barbecue that Saturday, and everyone brought something. I brought ribs. Tanisha brought her daughter's leftover balloons and tied them to every mailbox. Visual harmony never looked so good. 3 weeks after Brenda's arrest, the neighborhood was quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of hush that settles over people when they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Everyone had questions, but no one wanted to ask them out loud. Not yet. I spent most of those days helping Ruth sort through HOA files, which were, to no one's surprise, a mess. Half the documents were missing signatures. Several contracts had blank line items, and the electronic records looked like someone had tried to delete them in a panic. Nothing was labeled correctly. Ruth brought in a forensic accountant by the name of Calvin Hartwell, who spoke in clipped sentences and always wore gloves when handling the files, like he didn't want to get the corruption on him. By the end of the week, Calvin had uncovered something we hadn't expected. A wire transfer labeled Community Security Enhancement for $28,000. The money went to a firm called Ridgepoint Resolution Group, LLC. A quick search showed it was registered out of Nevada, with no website and no listed phone number. Ruth looked at me, eyebrows raised. This doesn't match any approved vendor. Never came up in a single board meeting. I'll bet that's who those guys worked for, I said. That's the thing, Calvin said without looking up. They didn't. I traced the EIN. Ridgepoint's only verifiable transaction was this one. It's a ghost company, Mr. Bradford. So Brenda hadn't just faked an enforcement team, she funneled money into a shell entity with no real operations. It was money laundering. And if we were right, she hadn't done it alone. That following Monday, Detective Tierney called again, her voice more clipped than usual. Ian, you're going to want to hear this. We've got Brenda in custody again. She posted bail the first time, but we just picked her up for attempting to tamper with a witness. I stood up from my workbench. Who? Your neighbor. Cliff. Someone broke into his garage last night and wiped the external hard drive on his security system. The only file they didn't delete? A recording of Brenda standing in his driveway at 2 in the morning holding a crowbar. I didn't say anything for a moment. We're charging her with witness intimidation and attempted destruction of evidence, Tierney continued. And there's more. We pulled her phone records. She exchanged over 100 messages with a man named Preston Lyle, former city contractor who was blacklisted 2 years ago for forging building permits. What does he have to do with this? He's the one who incorporated Ridgepoint Resolution Group. Fake name, fake address, but it's him. We've got his fingerprints on the original filing. So there it was. Brenda wasn't just an overreaching HOA tyrant, she was part of a wider fraud scheme, laundering association dues through shell companies and hiring convicted criminals to enforce imaginary regulations. Tierney met with me and Ruth at the community clubhouse that afternoon. She brought a plainclothes officer with her, someone from the financial crimes unit. They laid out a chart on the folding table, each node connected by red string like something out of a conspiracy thriller. Brenda, Preston Lyle, Ridgepoint, the fraudulent invoices, the shell consulting firm, it was all there. We're turning this over to the district attorney, Tierney said. But given the scale, I wouldn't be surprised if the state AG gets involved. Ruth leaned forward. What about restitution? If the court orders it, there'll be a claims process. But you should prepare for the fact that most of that money's gone, converted into cash withdrawals and prepaid debit cards. I looked down at the chart. How far does it go? Tierney sighed. We're still digging. There's a possibility she tried this in other neighborhoods. We found 3 more HOAs with similar shell contracts and enforcement teams that don't exist. Ruth tapped her pen against the table. Then this isn't just fraud. It's a coordinated operation. Tierney nodded. Exactly. Later that evening, I sat in my backyard with Rex and Juno watching the sun dip behind the oak trees. It was the first time in weeks I'd slowed down long enough to sit and think. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Tanisha. She'd just come back from a city council meeting and said one of the council members had brought up our neighborhood as a case study for HOA reform ordinances. Apparently, we'd become the cautionary tale. The next morning, Calvin showed up at my door with a flash drive. I need you to see this, he said, stepping inside. I loaded the files onto my laptop. They were scans of receipts, lots of them, all dated over the past 6 months. Each one billed to the HOA under vague descriptions like infrastructure review, community aesthetic assessment, and resident behavior monitoring. What's this last one? I asked, pointing to a charge labeled Information Asset Acquisition 5,000. That, Calvin said, was for a private investigator. Brenda hired someone to run background checks on 5 residents, including you. I stared at the screen. She was digging into my history? You, Cliff, Ruth, Tanisha, and a 5th name, Genevieve Marks. I blinked. Who's that? Hard to say. She doesn't live here. But I traced her name to a property sale 2 years ago. She sold Brenda her house. My blood ran cold. You think whatever happened during that sale is what started all this? It's possible. Genevieve Marks was named as a whistleblower in a different HOA lawsuit downstate. She testified against a president who diverted funds for personal use. That president was later acquitted on a technicality. I sat back, rubbing my jaw. So Brenda might have learned from someone who got away with it. Calvin nodded. Or she was involved from the beginning. The next board meeting was scheduled for that Saturday. Ruth arranged for a city mediator to attend just in case tensions ran high. They did. More than 50 residents showed up and not all of them were happy. Some had supported Brenda not because they liked her, but because they thought she was keeping the neighborhood orderly. She wasn't protecting the community, I said, addressing the group from the front table. She was exploiting it. Look at the evidence. The fake vendors. The unauthorized payments. The surveillance. She used fear to keep us compliant. One man near the back raised his hand. What happens now? Are we just supposed to trust the new board? No, Ruth said calmly. You're supposed to hold us accountable. That's the point. We'll be publishing detailed financial reports every quarter. Every meeting will be open. No more surprise inspections. No more closed-door decisions. Another voice spoke up. And the people she targeted? We've already launched a restoration committee, Ruth replied. Anyone who was unfairly fined or penalized will have their case reviewed, starting immediately. As the meeting wrapped up, I saw Cliff standing near the exit, his arm in a sling from the break-in. I walked over. You holding up? I asked. He gave a tired nod. Didn't think my garage would turn into a crime scene, but hey, at least my security cam caught her in the act. You did more than that, I said. You helped bring the whole thing down. He gave a half laugh. You know I used to work logistics? Spent 20 years making sure boxes got where they were supposed to go. Never thought that'd come in handy fighting an HOA dictator. We both looked around the room. People were lingering, chatting, smiling again. For the first time in a long while, the clubhouse didn't feel like enemy territory. Later that night, I got one more call from Detective Tierney. Just thought you'd want to know, she said. The DA's filing additional charges. They found evidence Brenda used HOA funds as collateral for a personal loan. We're talking about financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Minimum sentence on this stuff's not light. Good, I said. She doesn't deserve light. She's lawyered up, but Lyle's flipping. He's already offered to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Said Brenda had a list of HOAs she planned to restructure. Yours was just the first. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried, but because I was planning. Ruth and I had already talked about petitioning the city to create a civilian oversight board for HOA activity. If we could get it passed, it would be the first of its kind in the state. It wouldn't undo the damage, but it would make sure no one else could pull the same stunt. Not in our neighborhood. Not again. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, it was summer and the AC was barely holding on, but something about the way the fluorescent lights buzzed and echoed off the pale walls made the whole place feel sterile and hollow. Ruth sat beside me at the long bench near the front, flipping through a binder of exhibits like she'd done this 1,000 times. Calvin was 2 rows back with the forensic team, whispering to the assistant district attorney. I didn't envy them. They'd spent the last 2 weeks combing through over 6 years of HOA expenditures, pulling every suspicious invoice, every unvoted contract, every red flag Brenda Ellison had buried under fake resolution numbers and rubber-stamped signatures. Judge Halvorson entered without ceremony, his robes slightly wrinkled, his expression unreadable. He didn't look like a man who could be manipulated. That was good. This needed to stick. Brenda sat at the defense table, noticeably without her usual pastel wardrobe. Her blazer was charcoal gray now, and her hair was pulled back tight in a way that made her look smaller, not sharper. To her right sat her attorney, a wiry man with a voice that reminded me of creaking doors. I'd heard from Tierney that he'd taken the case reluctantly, reputation over merit. He didn't look thrilled to be there. The trial opened with the prosecution laying out the structure of Brenda's operation. The ADA, a woman named Clarice Monroe, didn't bother dramatizing it. She spoke plainly and methodically, like someone reading a ledger aloud. Over the course of 3 years, she said, the defendant diverted nearly $90,000 of community funds into fabricated consulting services, enforcement initiatives, and regulatory contracts, none of which were authorized through proper channels. In several cases, she collaborated with known felons, one of whom was actively evading arrest. The funds were laundered through fictitious corporations and ultimately used to finance personal expenditures disguised as community investments. She paused and gestured to the screen behind her, where Exhibit B lit up, a screenshot of the Ridgepoint Resolution Group's business filing, showing Brenda's name listed as the registered agent under a false address. The courtroom was silent. Then she turned to us. We will demonstrate that this wasn't mismanagement. It was a deliberate, calculated abuse of authority designed to enrich the defendant at the expense of the very community she was elected to serve. Brenda's attorney stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. My client maintains that all decisions were made within the bounds of her authority as HOA vice president. Any clerical errors or procedural oversights were not acts of malice, but of administrative burden. She received no personal gain. Clarice raised a single brow. We'll let the prepaid travel cards tell that story. The first witness was Cliff, who walked to the stand with his sling now gone but his demeanor still cautious. His voice didn't waver once. She came to my door last spring talking about a compliance sweep. Said she had authorization to inspect potential code violations. I didn't question it then. She seemed official. But after she fined me for an unauthorized driveway alteration, which turned out to be my son's chalk art, I started filming everything. He glanced toward the defense table once, then back at Clarice. Good thing I did. Because when she broke into my garage a few weeks ago, the camera I'd hidden in the rafters caught her red-handed. Clarice nodded. And did you recognize the object in her hand? A crowbar. And my old ladder she used to reach the hard drive. The video was played next. No one made a sound as Brenda's face came into frame, her outline visible through the garage's motion sensor lights. The footage was grainy but clear enough to see her remove the camera's casing, then stop short as she noticed the blinking red recorder further up. Judge Halvorson leaned forward slightly. Defense. Brenda's attorney stood but didn't approach. We argue that Ms. Ellison was attempting to retrieve HOA materials mistakenly left in the garage during a prior inspection. Cliff scoffed. She's never been in my garage. Not once. And those materials don't exist. Clarice called me next. I walked to the stand, swore in, and sat, keeping my gaze on the judge. Clarice didn't waste time. Mr. Bradford, to your knowledge, was there ever a vote approving the formation of a compliance enforcement division? No. The bylaws require a 2/3 community vote for any new governing body or enforcement program. There never was one. Did you have any interactions with these so-called compliance officers? Yes, 2 came to my property. They claimed authority under HOA regulations that don't exist. When I asked them to leave, they refused. I had to call the police. Were they credentialed? Not at all. One had a fake badge. The other carried a clipboard with no identifying information. I later found out both had criminal records. Clarice produced a printed screenshot and email Brenda had sent to a third-party contractor requesting covert inspection support for a non-disclosed neighborhood restructuring initiative. Did you recognize the language in this email as standard HOA procedure? She asked. Absolutely not. There's no such initiative. That's something she made up. Brenda's attorney rose. Objection speculation. Overruled, Halvorsen said. The witness has established expertise in the HOA's governing documents. The rest of the testimony built on the foundation Ruth, Calvin, and I had laid. A forensic IT specialist confirmed that HOA financial statements had been edited post factum. A former assistant treasurer testified that she resigned after Brenda demanded she pre-sign blank checks. The final witness was a man named Joel Ramirez, a former employee of the city's housing department who had been approached by Brenda under the pretense of streamlining municipal oversight. She offered me a consulting fee to look the other way on some zoning discrepancies, he said flatly. When I declined, she threatened to report me to the ethics board. Did she follow through? No. Because I recorded the call. Clarice played a snippet of that call, Brenda's voice, unmistakable, saying, "You'll either be part of this or you'll be buried under it." By the third day, Brenda's defense had eroded into procedural complaints and half-hearted objections. Her attorney stopped trying to refute the facts and instead leaned into emotional appeals: overwork, stress, confusion. But there was no confusion in the paper trail. No ambiguity in the surveillance footage. No gray area in the bank transfers. When Judge Halvorsen finally leaned back in his chair to deliver the verdict, the room was still. Not tense. Resolved. This court finds the defendant, Brenda Ellison, guilty on all counts: misappropriation of community funds, criminal impersonation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and witness intimidation. Sentencing will be deferred to next week pending a restitution hearing. Bail is revoked. As the bailiff approached, Brenda stood slowly, her eyes scanning the room. They didn't land on me or Ruth or Cliff. She looked past us all like she still couldn't believe it was real. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but honest. The kind of air you breathe when the storm's passed and you're finally allowed to start rebuilding. I never thought I'd see the day, Cliff said, arms crossed. She looked like a ghost in there. She saw the walls close in, Ruth said. That's what happens when you build a kingdom on threats and lies. Calvin joined us, holding a manila envelope. There's still cleanup. We traced one more payment Brenda made 2 months before the raid. It went to a firm that does mail forwarding for offshore accounts. Ruth looked at him. You think she was trying to move money out of the country? Maybe, but it didn't get far. The account was frozen yesterday. We walked back to the clubhouse later that afternoon. No speeches. No celebration. Just quiet conversations as neighbors gathered to discuss bylaws, transparency schedules, and community projects. The HOA was finally ours again, not in name, but in spirit. Tanisha stood by the corkboard placing a new flyer, Neighborhood Watch Interest Meeting, all welcome. I pinned up another next to it. Open forum, how we move forward. No pastel blazers. No fake authority. Just people. Talking. Planning. Watching out for one another. The fake inspectors were never seen again. One pled out and vanished into a witness protection program. The other was picked up in Pennsylvania trying to pass himself off as a code enforcement officer in another county. He's serving 3 years. Brenda? She received a 9-year sentence with eligibility for parole in 5. The judge also ordered full restitution, and while we'll never see every cent, the frozen accounts recovered enough to refund most of the stolen dues. We amended the bylaws shortly after. No board member could authorize a contract without recorded community approval. No enforcement action without third-party verification. And no more unchecked power. As for me, I went back to my normal routine. I still drink my morning coffee on the porch. Rex and Juno still patrol the yard like it's a military base. But now, when a car pulls into the cul-de-sac, I don't tense up. I know we already faced the worst kind of neighbor, the kind who hides behind rules to control you. And we beat her. Together.